Well, good morning, evening, and afternoon to all our online viewers, wherever you may be. My name is Russell Shao. I am the Executive Director of the Global Taiwan Institute. GTI is a 501c3 think tank dedicated exclusively to Taiwan policy research and related programs. Our mission is to enhance the relationship between the United States and Taiwan with the world by contributing to a more informed discussion about Taiwan and its people. In pursuit of this mission, we undertake several major programs. They include a biweekly publication called the Global Taiwan Brief, where we feature timely analysis written by our research fellows, advisors, as well as outside contributors. We also organize regular public seminars, like the webinars that you are participating in today, to have timely conversations about policy relevant issues related to Taiwan. We also organize an annual symposium where we invite leading policymakers, thinkers, and strategists to discuss the past, present, and future of U.S.-Taiwan relations. In addition to these policy-focused programs, we also encourage academic scholarship related to Taiwan. And they include offering scholarships to American researchers to conduct short-term field research in Taiwan, as well as for Taiwanese researchers to come here and spend a short period of time in DC to conduct policy research. We also have a new revamped podcast series called GTI Insights. And if you're not already subscribed to receive all our updates, you may do so by visiting our website at www.globaltaiwan.org. So we are very excited about today's program. While all our events are special, this one is especially so. It is the rollout event for GTI's latest occasional report, David and Goliath, Strengthening Taiwan's Deterrence and Resilience. This report is the product of a year-long study that identifies the challenges and examines the ways in which the United States and Taiwan can work closer together to counter China's growing hard and sharp power. The report concludes with 11 policy recommendations for Washington and Taipei. While the study stands alone on its own in terms of its focus, the study really also builds upon the studies that have been conducted by numerous think tanks in Washington, D.C. that have worked to further U.S.-Taiwan relations. And here we're very pleased to have Randy Schreiber, the chairman of the Project 2049 Institute, which has been really on the forefront of those efforts. But also recently, the report published by the Center for Strategic and International Studies on towards a stronger U.S.-Taiwan relationship. Here, I want to thank the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office for their generous support towards this report, as well as to GTI's staff and the current class and past interns who helped in fine-tuning this report. I want to also stress that the opinions that we, the authors, express in this report are our own, and should not be read to represent the positions of our respective affiliate institutions. All of us individually have long trails of public writings and speaking, much more so in the case of my co-authors, which include decades of public service. And our comments are available in the public record on the subject matter of this report. Allow me now to just briefly introduce the co-authors of this report. Wallace Tripp Gregson served as Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asian and Pacific Security Affairs from 2009 to 2011 during the Obama administration. He retired from the Marine Corps in 2005 with the rank of Lieutenant General, and he last served as the commander of the U.S. Marine Corps Forces Pacific, Commanding General of the Fleet Marine Force Pacific, and Commander of the U.S. Marine Corps Pacific, headquartered in Camp Smith in Hawaii. He's also a member of GTI's advisory board. Stephen Young served as a U.S. diplomat for over 33 years, with assignments in Washington, Taipei, Moscow, Beijing, Kyrgyzstan, and Hong Kong. Steve was ambassador to the Kyrgyz Republic, the director of the American Institute in Taiwan, and consul general to Hong Kong. Ambassador Young has a long personal history with Taiwan, where he first lived as a teen in the 1960s, where his father was a MAG advisor to the Taiwan military. Steve is also a member of GTI's advisory board. And I'm Russell Hsiao. I'm the executive director of GTI, a senior fellow at the Jamestown Foundation, and an adjunct fellow at the Honolulu-based Pacific Forum. After Chip and Steve speak, Randy Schreiber, who I briefly mentioned earlier, he only left government at the end of last year as the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Affairs under the Trump administration, and he will serve as our event discussant. Randy has a long career in the U.S. government and the military, having also served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs. From 2001 and 2003, he served as Chief of Staff and Senior Policy Advisor to then Deputy Secretary of State. And after returning to private life, Randy is now the chairman of the Asia Policy think tank Project 2049 Institute. So before we dive into an in-depth discussion about the report, I'm now honored to introduce our opening speaker, Ambassador Xiaobi Kim, the representative of the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office. Ambassador Xiao assumed her position as Taiwan's representative to the United States in July 2020, after serving as senior advisor to the president at the National Security Council of Taiwan. She previously served 4 terms in Taiwan's legislature, representing overseas citizens for the first term, and in the constituencies of Taipei City and Hualien County through different terms. The representative also held many political posts, but in the interest of time, I'll not go into those details. You can easily find them online. Thank you for joining us, Ambassador Xiao, for what I believe is your first public event since the U.S. presidential elections. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Russell and the Global Taiwan Institute team for inviting me back to speak today. And I'm so pleased to join my old friends, Ambassador Stephen Young, General Chip Gregson, and also, of course, former Assistant Secretary Randy Schreiber. And I want to congratulate all of you on the release of this special report on strengthening Taiwan's deterrence and resiliency against China's hard and sharp power. The authors are not just Taiwan's well-respected friends, but they are also the leading practitioners and strategic thinkers on defense and diplomacy. We welcome your timely and clear-eyed policy suggestions. And since we last spoke, the geostrategic environment around us has fast evolved, and the Taiwan-U.S. partnership has continued to grow. As the report suggests, regional tensions continue to rise as the PRC ramps up its political and military pressure campaign against Taiwan and its neighboring countries. And yet the report also stated, as the new American administration sets out its priorities with its allies and partners to preserve and promote democracy and the rules-based order, it will find Taiwan as a natural partner in the face of the rise of revisionist authoritarian powers. So I appreciate that the report has eloquently laid out a roadmap towards enhancing Taiwan's democratic resiliency. And I'm confident that under the auspices of the Taiwan Relations Act and the 6 assurances, successive U.S. administrations will continue its strong bipartisan support of Taiwan based on our shared values and interests. As a starter, I want to highlight for you 3 issues and areas of challenges and opportunities that our government has been working to address. First and foremost, the global COVID-19 pandemic exacerbates geopolitical challenges. And as the global pandemic has continued to worsen, China has ramped up its wolf warrior style propaganda campaign targeting Taiwan as well as other like-minded countries around the world. At the same time, the PLA has also continued its saber rattling in the East China Sea, the South China Sea, and the Taiwan Straits area, of course, and its border with India. I appreciate that the report authors support on establishing a joint operational picture among stakeholders, as well as adapting a more holistic approach considering Taiwan's security. As the report stated, it's imperative that Taiwan has the ability to prevail over China's anaconda strategy. It is also helpful for the report to emphasize that Washington's TRA commitments should not be conditioned by other policy considerations, and we are certainly hopeful that the United States will continue the regularization of arms sales to Taiwan. Taiwan will also bolster our defense capabilities to blunt any PRC aggression and miscalculations. As our Commander-in-Chief, President Tsai Ing-wen, recently pledged, Taiwan will continue to enhance the modernization of defensive combat capabilities, upgrade asymmetric combat abilities, promote self-defense capabilities, and reform the military reserve mobilization system to respond to the expansion and provocations of military activities from across the strait. And as we speak, our hearts and prayers go out to our F-16 fighter pilot, Colonel Jiang Zhengzhi, who disappeared from the nighttime training on Tuesday. During this difficult time, our collective resolve to safeguard our democracy and to protect our homeland remains unmistakable and ironclad. Another priority area is to ensure that Taiwan is able to respond collectively to the shifts of global economic and security, the situation. The critical supply chains and their realignment are part of the very significant conversation that is ongoing. Taiwan's success in fighting the coronavirus has enhanced our economic position in the region and global standing, and yet we must also be prepared for emerging trends in the region, such as the RCEP and CPTPP. Tomorrow, the first ever Economic Prosperity Partnership Dialogue will be held in Washington. The dialogue is expected to drive closer cooperation in areas such as the restructuring of supply chains, technology, infrastructure, and energy. Another encouraging development is the signing of the framework to strengthen infrastructure finance and market building cooperation in September. This aims to catalyze investments in infrastructure across the Indo-Pacific region. Most importantly, President Tsai's executive decree in August to lift import restrictions on American pork and beef has signaled our strong commitment to international scientific standards and has put forward a critical step in our pursuit of a bilateral trade agreement with the United States. Last but not least, the report rightfully stated that China's sharp power and political warfare challenge is backed by its hard power. Our survival from this existential threat depends on our ability to integrate efforts across all levels of our free and open society to strengthen our public confidence and immunity against Orwellian China's subversive influence operations. In this spirit, we welcome the State Department's announcement of the Indo-Pacific Transparency Initiative. We are determined to continue our annual U.S.-Taiwan consultations on democratic governance in the Indo-Pacific region, and we invite more businesses, NGOs, and media to open offices in Taiwan to take advantage of its free environment and warm hospitality. We will certainly continue to expand our joint efforts in depth and breadth through the Global Cooperation Training Framework, or what we generally call the GCTF. Despite the challenges of being excluded from major international organizations, we will continue championing our shared causes, such as the UN Sustainable Development Goals, international law, unalienable human rights, global health, aviation safety, among others. Let me conclude by echoing the beautiful analogy of this report. Taiwan, as a confident and intelligent young warrior, David, would eventually defeat giant Goliath against all odds. This analogy also gives inspiration to the cat warrior facing up to wolf warriors here in Washington, D.C. Congratulations again on today's report launch, and I wish everyone a safe and blissful holiday season around the corner.
Thank you so very much, Ambassador, for those very kind words. You have certainly carefully read the report, and for that we are certainly grateful. I know the ambassador has to leave for another engagement, so thank you again for being here, and thank you for again technical support for our project. Now, allow me to to briefly jump right into our discussion for today's report rollout. As a reminder to our audience members, we will be taking questions from the audience at the conclusion of the discussion. So if you'd like to ask a question, you may submit your questions via email at contact@globaltaiwan.org, or use the chat function on the YouTube page, or tweet us at Global Taiwan. Make sure to include your name as well as your affiliation with your question, and who the question is directed to. So, as I've noted earlier, this report is really the product of a year-long study where we seek to identify the challenges as well as deeply examine the ways in which the United States and Taiwan can work closer together to counter China's growing hard and sharp power. And I think, as the ambassador really carefully noted, or astutely noted, it's really trying to arrive at a holistic approach in dealing with this set of challenge, right? Both the set of hard and sharp power, because as we tried to highlight, they reinforce one another. While we began writing this report well before the conclusion of the US election, our original aim really remains unchanged. In fact, it is perhaps even more timely now and more important. All the major US media network now forecast that former Vice President Joe Biden has won the 2020 presidential election and will become the 46th president of the United States. And as the administration is being formed, it will have to think through and grapple with the challenges of setting out an agenda for critical issues facing US vital interests in multiple regions of the world. We would contend that nowhere are the potential opportunities as well as risks greater for US interests and the rules-based order than in the Indo-Pacific region. And this is a broad expanse that stretches from the Indian Ocean to California, and the narrow Taiwan Strait remains a critical flashpoint of instability as tensions continue to rise as a result of the PRC's ramped up pressure campaign against Taiwan and in the region. As the president-elect and his transition team take a fine-tooth comb to review the agencies as well as the policies of the current administration, one area that they will certainly look at is Taiwan policy. As the incoming administration sets out the agenda with US allies and partners to preserve and promote the rules-based order, it will have a natural partner in Taiwan. Tsai Ing-wen was reelected president of Taiwan in January 2020, formerly known as the Republic of China, with a popular mandate. And as a democratic ally and vital security partner of the United States, Washington and Taipei have many reasons to deepen their ties. It's clear that in the face of a rise of revisionist authoritarian powers and the existential threat that it poses to Taiwan's democratic system and the serious challenges to the rules-based order, the United States, Taiwan, and other like-minded nations will need to work closer together. But how? We hope that this report will provide policymakers in Washington and Taipei a common reference point that both identifies the challenges as well as propose some recommendations to ensure common purpose and policy objectives through the transition. Although, to wrap up my introduction by stating that it is the prerogative of any incoming administration to review the policies and practices of its predecessor, this is, of course, a necessary and constructive process that any policy is continuously updated to reflect current realities. However, a shift to conducting policy with a creeping deference to Beijing's One China principle would be dangerous. Despite the many difficulties that mar the Trump administration's broader policies, Taiwan policy has been one of its clear bright spots. As such, I believe it behooves the incoming administration to continue to expand on these policies, working to demonstrate that the U.S. approach to Taipei and Washington is bipartisan and enduring. It is no exaggeration to say that the U.S.-Taiwan relationship is stronger now than it's ever been since 1979. And I believe that these bonds will grow stronger with care and good management by both Washington and Taipei by focusing on the elements of the report. With that, let me turn it over to Steve, who will cover the sharp power section of the report. And after he finishes, we'll turn it over to Chip to go through the hard power section of the report. Steve? You need to unmute yourself, Steve.
I'm not. It's not. Okay, you got it? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you very much for organizing this and for all that you do for GTI. It's a pleasure to see some old friends here. I haven't seen Beacom in a long time. And Randy and I go back to some fun times, including on Central Asia as well as Taiwan. It's also great to work with General Gregson again. We've known each other for a long time and have shared a friendship and collaboration, which continues now. So I feel like I'm in very good company. I have, as many of you know, enjoyed a long lifetime affection for Taiwan, having lived in Kaohsiung in the early 1960s. Almost 60 years ago, when my father was assigned to be an advisor to the Taiwan Army back in 1963. And as I calculate it, I've lived in Taiwan 5 times for a total of 11 years over the last 50 years, including my last tour as AIT director from 2006 to 2009. Therefore, I've been privileged to see Taiwan transform itself from an agricultural and textile exporter under an autocratic Chiang Kai-shek to a thriving high-tech powerhouse with one of the most vibrant democracies in all of Asia. Its deft handling of the coronavirus is just one of the latest examples of the country's modern success story, something we can all learn from. The PRC has also been developing economically and now rates as the second largest economy in the world, trailing only the United States. Unfortunately, China has not followed the trajectory of so many other Asian nations in opening up its political system to greater popular participation. Under the imperial regime of President Xi Jinping, the PRC has intensified its threats of using military force to resolve the Taiwan issue. Its heavy spending on the PLA is largely directed toward that aim. Taiwan also focuses on its military modernization with the robust support of Washington. First, the US continues to sell weapons systems to our Taipei friends. Secondly, both in doctrine and training, we remain prepared to come to Taiwan's defense if it is threatened or attacked. This has persisted through multiple changes of administrations, and I have no doubt that the incoming Biden administration will continue to carry on in this vein. I want to talk a bit about sharp power, which is one of the focuses of the report. Particularly the threat of sharp power to my favorite Pacific Island country as it faces it from the PRC across 90 miles of the Taiwan Strait. Sharp power describes aggressive and subversive policies employed by authoritarian governments as a projection of state power, especially aimed at democratic countries like Taiwan. It seeks to take advantage of the asymmetry between free and unfree systems, allowing authoritarian regimes to limit free expression and distant political environments while shielding their own domestic public spaces from democratic appeals. Beijing has devoted considerable time and resources to influencing principles among Taiwan's 24 million citizens. Much of this effort has been wrapped in China's One China principle, an amorphous term that boils down to Beijing's claim that it is the sole legitimate power on both sides of the Taiwan Strait, an assumption roundly rejected by the people and government of Taiwan. I won't delve deeply into the One China principle other than to say that it has been roundly rejected by the democratic people of Taiwan as having any practical application to today's situation. And as to the One China, Two Systems thesis put forward by Deng Xiaoping nearly 40 years ago, which he applied both to Hong Kong as the British were preparing to return the colony's future to the PRC and to the island of Taiwan, known to many of us as the Republic of China. I think this hoary slogan has long lost any relevance to today's world. The shocking decision of Xi Jinping to crush all semblance of autonomy to Hong Kong in recent months, less than halfway through the 50-year period Deng had pledged to essentially leave the former British colony alone, has many of us puzzled. Why would Xi do this now, in the midst of a global pandemic and economic slump? Of course, the primary victims are the 7.5 million residents of Hong Kong, many of whom I came to know when I was serving there as consul general. But the signal to the people of Taiwan is just as clear. There is no longer any trust on the island for anything Mr. Xi says. This is particularly clear to the ruling DPP under President Tsai. But I doubt if even the KMT could find much solace in its aspiration to forge more productive relations with Beijing under these conditions. Then President Ma Ying-jeou's Singapore meeting with President Xi a few years ago seems like ancient history now. The current KMT standard bearer, former Kaohsiung Mayor Han Kuo-yu, suffered a similar fate. Having famously visited Hong Kong and even ventured into southern China, the now disgraced former mayor of my childhood hometown was soundly defeated in the presidential elections earlier this year, giving Madam Tsai a second term as Taiwan's leader. His own constituents then bounced him from his perch as Kaohsiung mayor in a special referendum. The implication of all of this for Taiwan was made clear by former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations and Republican rising star Nikki Haley, who unequivocally stated, quote, "We should always use the power of our voice to fight for people who are fighting for their own freedoms. And that whole protest in Hong Kong is about if Hong Kong fails, Taiwan is next." Well, Hong Kong hasn't fallen yet, but it is teetering on the edge of the precipitous today. Xi Jinping has made sure of that. I knew Carrie Lam when I was consul general in Hong Kong in the period 2009 to 2012, and actually earlier as well. And she seemed a dedicated and level-headed administrator. But she has been under incredible pressure from Beijing to crack down on even peaceful demonstrations of protest in the former colony. It seems to me we can now safely dismiss the idea of Hong Kong serving as any kind of model for Taiwan, for the few who used to believe in that possibility. This moral is clear. China's word is not to be trusted. One country, two systems is dead, and Taiwan must be clear on that. Barring a significant shift in mainland politics, it has to bolster its defense spending and look elsewhere for its international support. Fortunately, the United States remains a steady and supportive partner in all of this. President Trump, after a curious early bromance with the thuggish Chinese leader, has shifted the other way in the waning weeks of his presidency. The US Congress is just as solid as ever in its abiding support for Taipei, a bipartisan consensus in a body where not much else is widely agreed upon. It has passed a number of laws aimed at supporting Taiwan politically, economically, and militarily. That this will not change come January 20th when Mr. Trump heads back to the solace of his hotels and golf courses. Joe Biden is an experienced and sensible man. Though I cannot document it, I suspect in his long tenure in the Senate, he probably visited Taiwan at least once. It is a tribute to Taiwan's flexible foreign policy that it has long nurtured ties to both the Senate and House of Representatives, including by inviting members to come visit and see firsthand what a marvelous example of freedom, democracy, economic entrepreneurship the island has become. In my multiple tours of duty at AIT, I briefed numerous CODELs, that's slang for congressional delegations, of senators and representatives passing through. They inevitably left impressed by the island and its plucky defense of its hard-fought freedoms. Taipei has also assiduously courted state and local governments in a sophisticated program that has created a wide network of friends throughout the United States. Contrast that with the mainland, which has been much more complacent in assuming it doesn't have to overexert itself on such petty matters. All of these examples reflect the soft power so central to Taiwan's international success. Now, it's true that Beijing has steadily whittled away the number of countries enjoying formal diplomatic ties. I believe at present there are still only 15 allies left, as money and flattery has had its predictable effect. But as some of you may have heard me say before, the key players in Taiwan's orbit are more accurately the major states like the United States, Japan, the EU, ASEAN, India, Vietnam, and many others who, despite no formal relations, maintain active representation in Taipei and welcome Taiwan's diplomats in an unofficial capacity into their capitals and societies. Taiwan has also opened its doors to foreign students and businesses, which helps to educate and partner with important non-government sectors around the globe. The numbers do not match those of Chinese students, but are significant. I have another thing which might be ironically called soft power at work across the strait and across the Pacific Ocean, excuse me. I wrote these things late yesterday, and my handwriting is a little bit difficult for me to read. China has sent hundreds of thousands of its young and ambitious citizens abroad to study. There are estimates that several 100,000 of them have studied in the United States. Many remain to become valued citizens in their adopted land. Many more go home, enriched by their educational and social experience. I see these returned students as a fifth column, bringing Western liberal values home that, over time, could be an additional piece of soft power in the otherwise tightly controlled internal political situation in the ironically called People's Republic. By the way, I have no plans to visit the People's Republic anytime soon, if you were wondering. We know, for example, that Xi Jinping has a son and daughter who recently studied in the United States at some school in Boston. I forget the name. The fact is that open societies like the United States have enjoyed an unusual contrast in battling sharp and hard power from our adversaries around the world. Here, I would like to talk a bit about the military situation in East Asia, particularly as it pertains to the area north, south, east, and west of Taiwan. My good friend, General Gregson, will undoubtedly have more to say about this. But in the context of today's topic, it is difficult to separate soft and hard power so neatly. The United States has long relied on a robust presence in this region, going back to the lesson of World War II when we were caught off balance by Japanese aggression in the run-up to December 7, 1941. As a boy living in southern Taiwan in the early 1960s, I remember going to Tsai Ing Harbor one day to see the results of a clash between a Taiwan frigate and PRC torpedo boats in the Straits. I believe it was 1964, but these things were recurring in those days. While the news headline was of a glorious victory for ROC forces, what we saw in the harbor in Tsai Ing was a badly damaged US-built ship with gaping holes in its hull inflicted by PRC ships. So even back then, the Cold War with China could quickly turn hot. Or to put it in today's terms, soft power could run up quickly against hard power. Yes, including Taiwan, must never let their guard down in making clear we will never accept the use of force to counter attempts by the PRC to threaten or attack our friends and allies out there. I know from experience that our armed forces practice for such eventualities and are pretty well prepared to meet them, something General Gregson made comment on as well. Like many others involved in today's discussions, we can continue hoping China will someday soon begin following up on the promise of its economic rise by opening up its society to more progressive goals of real popular participation in major government decisions. Yes, I am speaking of that amorphous but wonderful concept we call democratization, a concept that Mr. Xi and his colleagues in the Politburo fear so badly, allowing their own people a direct voice in governance. Studies find again and again that democratic open societies are much less likely to initiate military hostilities than more closed systems. As some great thinker once said, democracy is the worst political system there is, except for all the alternatives. This, I think, is one reason Chairman Xi and his Politburo buddies are so afraid of democratic Taiwan, an ethnically and culturally cynic version of themselves that for 3+ decades now has pioneered an open and popular system that allows the humble masses to choose their leaders and the policies they adopt. This is the ultimate threat to authoritarian regimes around the world. In Putin's Russia, Xi's China, Erdogan's Turkey, the list goes on and on. You don't see people seeking to flee the stable democracies of the world the way they run from authoritarian regimes that deny their citizens universally applauded concepts like freedom of speech and thought. This is the core difference between soft power and hard power we are discussing today. Taiwan, like the United States, stands on the right side of this issue, which is why I remain deeply confident in the future of our good friends on the Free Republic of China on Taiwan today and for a long time to come. Now, in conclusion, I think back to the title of our work, David and Goliath. And as I recall, David had one stone with which to fight the giant, but Taiwan has three. 1, a thriving democracy. 2, a booming high-tech democracy or economy. And 3, the backing of the United States. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for that, Steve. And I think the contrast between that you've highlighted between China's sharp power and Taiwan's soft power are very instructive and really informs a lot of how we framed the analysis in our report. And the centrality of Hong Kong as an example of really of China, the nature of the CCP regime is essential, and we devote a sizable portion of our report in the sharp power section on Hong Kong because really at the heart of it, we can't expect the CCP to treat other people any better than it treats its own people. And what's happened in Hong Kong is really, I think, telling of what it intends with regards to Taiwan, but also more broadly in the region, if not the world as well. So thank you very much, Steve. And let me turn it over now to Chip.
Well, thank you, Russell, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of our participants in this session. My thanks to GTI for inviting me to participate in this exercise, and my thanks to Ambassador Xiao for her very perceptive and gracious comments. I think I wore out a pen trying to copy down things she was saying, and it's great to see old friends on the screen here, including Randy Schreiber, and thanks for your recent service, Andy. I have some idea what you were going through, and you performed superbly, and Taiwan's better off for it, as is the United States. Hard power supports sharp power against Taiwan by being always present and always threatening. It's often said that Xi Jinping has more power than any Chinese ruler since Mao. Xi has diminished or ended the PRC's previous practice of collective leadership and set the conditions for his continued rule. Collective leadership slowed decisions, and when things inevitably went wrong, served to dilute the blame. Now, all credit and blame attaches to the chairman. Having made unification of Taiwan a central pillar of his great rejuvenation, he cannot be seen to compromise on this goal for fear of losing his position or worse. So Taiwan is a key to his continued rule. Xi wields more power than Mao in one particularly important way. He has an unmatched capability to project force into the East China Sea, the South China Sea, and the First Island chain, far beyond anything the land-bound power of Mao's People's Army could do. The rapid expansion of the PRC's military, naval, and air forces, as well as the expansion of the Chinese Coast Guard and maritime militia, go far beyond any obvious defense needs. The size, power, progress, and activities of these power projection forces provide strong psychological pressure that supports all the other elements of national power applied to support China's unremitting expansion. China's recent reorganization of its military enhances its power both in reality and on the world stage. The destructive potential of China's forces is openly displayed. They publicly practice assaults on replicas of Taiwan's government buildings and hold amphibious drills. Rockets are regularly rolled out for admiration and intimidation. The PLA Navy makes clear its objection to lawful activities of other nations' naval forces, including those of Taiwan and the United States. Power projection by these forces is a daily occurrence. The territorial airspace of other nations, including Taiwan, is often violated, and fishermen are bullied by Chinese Coast Guard and maritime militia vessels asserting, quote, undisputed historical sovereignty, unquote. Of particular interest to Taiwan is the gray zone power projection operation under China's hard power threat that emerged in 2013. Beginning in December of that year and continuing for the next nearly 2 years, China dredged up enough sand, coral, and gravel from the bottom of the South China Sea to create nearly 3,000 acres of new territory in an international waterway. These new features now host 3,000-meter runways and deep-water ports, extending China's surveillance and defense network far into the sea to the immediate south of Taiwan. The world took little notice beyond a successful petition to the United Nations by the Philippines. The UN backed the Philippine case, the US maintained a disinterested silence, and China ignored the criticism. One obvious element of this psychological pressure is the ever-present allegation that Taiwan's situation is hopeless. This is often emphasized in Chinese professional military journals and articles written, we are told, by colonels expressing their private opinions. This conclusion circulates in many places beyond Taiwan. Certainly, an accounting of the forces on each side of the strait favors the PRC, but sheer numbers are not the end of the tale. If they were, Great Britain would not have survived the Blitz in 1940 with the forces of the Third Reich prepared to cross the English Channel to invade. And the Falkland Islands would still be called the Malvinas. Countering that narrative, resisting coercion, and strengthening deterrence requires Taiwan, with U.S. collaboration under its obligations and in support of its vital national interest, to establish and maintain an undoubted capability to prevail against armed attempts at subjugation. Demolishing the myth that Taiwan has no hope is critical. A superior strategic concept is needed to counter numerical odds. It must be responsive to changing conditions. What worked in the past may be deadly if the problem has changed. We live in an era, quote, awash in change, in former Secretary of State George Shultz's phrase. The ways of combat are changing rapidly in our territorial domains of air, land, and sea. We are also adding new domains, space, cyberspace, the information space, and the electromagnetic spectrum. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, 5G communications, and other phenomena bring new and complex opportunities. Unexamined, unquestioned, ritually followed doctrine is even more deadly now. Our explicit and implicit assumptions, most critically, the things we think we know that just ain't so, in the words of Mark Twain, must be vigorously examined. One early conclusion might be that pervasive surveillance and long-range precision fires enhance the power of forces in the defense behind a natural barrier like a strait. Ground forces with the right weapons distributed in agile, mobile units along the littoral can and must greatly enhance our naval and air forces in the battle for air and sea control. Gone are the days when the ground pounders can be left on the beach with bayonets fixed, awaiting the results of the fight on and over the sea. They must be full participants in the long-range fight for air and sea control in support of our air and sea components. Taiwan, because it is a vigorous democracy, should have an advantage in the free and innovative thinking needed here. Taiwan's overall defense concept, or ODC, is a great step forward, and it presents a very realistic view of Taiwan's challenges. The ODC describes the threat as an anaconda strategy. The metaphor seems apt. The threat combines forcible coercion, market seduction, isolation from international organizations, and compressing Taiwan through manipulating Washington. Defeating this anaconda demands defeating the strategy, defeating Chinese diplomacy and their operational plan. The ODC should not be locked in concrete. The ODC should be treated as a continually evolving concept as new conditions are developed and new opportunities emerge from fertile minds in Taiwan and the United States. The ODC way forward includes a review of current force structure, enhancement of reserve capability, improvement of military medicine, revision of military law, and, most critical in my mind, coherent joint doctrine and professional military education. These should be continuous efforts as the threat grows and changes. The United States has a clear and compelling vital interest in Taiwan's undoubted ability to prevail over China's anaconda strategy. Moreover, the United States and Taiwan now face the same strategic and operational challenge, that of how to ensure sea and air superiority, or at a minimum, deny the same to an enemy in the face of the Chinese threat. It's the same problem faced by Japan. We will not be able to protect Japan's 6,852 islands spanning the littoral from near the Arctic Circle to south of Taipei under current doctrine. We are outnumbered and outgunned. All of Asia's maritime nations face the same challenge. This challenge must be met by all in a combined effort. On first look, it appears that low-cost, lethal air and ground unmanned platforms, unmanned long-range surface and subsurface vessels, mobile, rapidly deployable rocket systems, long-range precision fires, loitering munitions, mobile air defenses, and counter-precision guided munitions and capabilities, signature management, electronic warfare, and expeditionary airfields may be useful. Taiwan's training and exercise opportunities are limited by Taiwan's geography. Without rigorous exercises involving force-on-force action, the needed modifications will be impossible. A full application of realistic simulation capabilities linked and integrated across the Pacific with Indo-PACOM simulation engines is necessary to test concepts and capabilities in a realistic and exacting manner. Observations and conclusions from the exercises involving combinations of live, virtual, and constructive forces aided by modern simulation capabilities will indicate future directions while greatly enhancing the training of leaders at all levels. Force structure building, doctrinal development, professional military education, and training must all proceed together. Reflecting our growing bilateral ties, the United States and Taiwan should take further steps to enhance extensive, close, friendly commercial, cultural, and other relations. This would be consistent with the language of the Taiwan Relations Act, as well as the Taiwan Travel Act, the Asia Reassurance Initiative Act, and the Taipei Act. Finally, in company with the recommendations above, that we must always critically assess our military doctrine, we must also critically assess our policy principles. It must be made clear through our actions that our legal obligation to ensure Taiwan's self-defense capability creates a moral obligation for us to ensure its success. Thank you.
Excellent, Chip. And let me just say how much the study has benefited from, your really in-depth knowledge of the intricacies of defense. And seriously, that was, I think we couldn't have done that lift without your participation in it. And beyond just the sort of the hard defense side, I think you've also given us an appreciation for trying to understand from your perspective as a military man, really the non-kinetic effects of military instruments of power, right? And I think that from your vantage point and being able to highlight those issues and how, the military instruments of power are utilized for political ends and how China does that is critical. And I think as we think about a holistic response to that, we have to think about how these two elements work in tandem with each other, and how do we utilize them to counter China's sharp and hard power. With that, let me turn it over to Randy as the discussant for our report. Randy?
Great. Well, thank you, Russell. And it is a real pleasure to be part of this forum today and to join this discussion with some great colleagues and friends. Russell, we like to think we had a role in your professional development with your time at Project 2049, but we continue to just be very proud of all the work you do. And General Gregson, you've been a model for me, including how you conducted the position that I subsequently held after your service. And Ambassador Young, it's great to see you. This is it's been too long, and really appreciate all your service through the years. As Russell was reading your bio, boy, I just can't think of anybody who's got a better background. And really, although I'm a Red Sox fan, as Steve knows, this is really a murderer's row of experts to take on this topic. And really appreciate what you've done in this report. And this is a fantastic report. I read through it more than once, and I appreciate how the policy recommendations are really teed up by the analysis and the description of the threat. One of the more comprehensive pieces I've seen on the political warfare influence operations side of things, and then of course General Gregson's overlaying of the hard power side. It's really quite a good report, and the recommendations that follow are very important. Before I go further, I want to comment on a couple of things that Ambassador Young and General Gregson said, because I think they're very important. When Steve talked about the situation in Hong Kong and this being the death of the one country, two systems model for Taiwan, as far as the people of Taiwan are concerned, I'm not sure what the polling would say, how much support that model ever had. But this is really important because the PRC and the CCP have held on to a fiction that peaceful reunification, as they call it, is a possibility based on the fact that they have compatriots in Taiwan who share a vision for a future one China. And after this landslide victory by Tsai Ing-wen, to me, one of the more significant things that came out of that was the KMT, and in particular, the new KMT leader, Johnny Chung, saying, we may not be able to win another election in Taiwan if we run on the 92 consensus and the idea of a future one China. If that fiction is stripped away, I think it's an understandable response to the events in Hong Kong and Taiwan's own experience. But it also may make the risks even greater if the PRC can no longer hold on to that fiction and believes that the only way to achieve unification is through coercion. So I think that was a very important point Steve made. And General Gregson's point about the rejection of this defeatist attitude that Taiwan is indefensible, or that the military outcome would be inevitable should there be a decision to resort to force on the part of the PRC. That's extremely important too, and it's a view I share. I think Taiwan is extremely defensible if the right decisions are made with respect to strategy and acquisition and training and so forth. I always say 80 nautical miles of water, mountainous, inhospitable terrain is a pretty good place to start on the defense before you buy a single weapon system. And it remains axiomatic that it still requires soldiers with rifles and bayonets to take land, hold land, and exert sovereignty over an otherwise unwilling population. And that is an awfully long pole in that tent, how you get hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of soldiers across the strait to be able to do that and exert sovereignty. So General Gregson's points about investing in the right capabilities and training in the right ways is also extremely important. So thank you both for making those points. I think before we close the chapter on this Trump administration, it's maybe helpful to reflect on some of the innovations that were made and some of the progress that was achieved. And I think it's progress only made possible by the good work of previous administrations, including the Obama administration. But as we think about a transition and what might be sustained and preserved, let me just tick off a few things that I think are very important developments in this last administration. First of all, I think the National Defense Strategy, which flows from the National Security Strategy, which identifies China as a strategic competitor and identifies that competition as the organizing principle for our major agencies, including the defense enterprise, is extraordinarily important. I've served in several administrations, but the clarity of this National Defense Strategy is unlike anything I've seen before. The competition with China is not a priority. It's not one of our priorities. It is the single priority for which we focus on which we focus and for which we do our preparations. So this giant defense enterprise, 2.5 million people, $750 billion budgets, getting everybody rowing in the same direction is hard, but this NDS is giving us an opportunity to do that. So I think even if there's rebranding, and administrations certainly have a tendency to want to rebrand and name their own strategy, use their own words, and I would anticipate that being the case going forward. But I hope that level of clarity and prioritization is preserved. Now, with respect to Taiwan, I think there were some other important policy steps. I think the normalization of the arms sales process is extremely helpful. To treat Taiwan like a normal FMS, foreign military sales partner, I think is important for us. It allows us to do the things we can do as a partner to support implementation of the overall defense concept. It's important for Taiwan to be able to do normal budgeting and the things that the Defense Ministry and the LY need to do to have smooth acquisition process. I frankly think it's important for the region and even the PRC, which may sound odd, but I've always felt as though the bundling of major arms sales and waiting for that sort of Goldilocks moment to spring a congressional notification actually made it harder for the PRC to swallow. It gave a point in time and a focal point for them to really direct all their energies, their démarches and other protests, and made for I think greater spikes in tension with those major bundles of arm packages. I think the routinization of arms sales actually can condition them. They will never like it. They won't applaud us for it, but they can be conditioned to understand that this is a normal foreign military sales partner, and we will process requests and respond to requests in a normal fashion. So I hope that remains the case going forward. We did some reorganization. I think when we created the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for China competition, perhaps less noticed by some, we removed Taiwan from that portfolio, and we now have a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia that is an allies and partners portfolio. So that DASD covers Japan, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and Taiwan. That's an important mindset change to have a DASD who thinks about Taiwan as a partner that merits its own consideration, not just a subset of U.S.-China relations. It's a mindset change to think about Taiwan as a partner and a contributor to problem solving in the region. But there are also some practical benefits, one of which is it frees that Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense up to travel to Taiwan, as Heino Klink has done. So he no longer would have to worry about returning from a trip to Taiwan and dealing with PLA interlocutors and Chinese interlocutors. He's able to talk about Taiwan issues with his other portfolio countries who are, again, partners and allies. So I hope that is preserved as well. I think what the new administration will do is take a look at these policies, and as Russell said, they have every right to review. But I think they'll see more continuity rather than a inflection point or dramatic departure from previous administrations, and see the wisdom in sustaining the trajectory that we're on. What I mean by that is I think the Trump administration, although largely defined by the unconventional nature and the rhetoric and disruptive qualities of President Trump himself, I think our policies, particularly on defense and security, were more evolutionary than revolutionary. I think the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy is a natural successor to the pivot or rebalance to Asia of the Obama administration, and one that General Gregson had such an important role in developing and implementing those policies. Remember, it was the Obama administration that talked about 60% of naval forces being in the Indo-Pacific as part of the strategic guidance. It was the Obama administration that talked about integrity of our supply chains and protection of our innovation base. Those were memos signed out by Secretary Hagel. It was the Obama administration that did tremendous work at developing not only our traditional allies, but our emerging partners like Vietnam and India. These were great efforts by the Obama administration that the Trump administration benefited from. So when we talked about getting on a more competitive posture vis-a-vis China, we had a very good inheritance from which to work. And I think, again, the incoming administration will be able to leverage that for even greater gains in terms of being on a competitive and appropriate posture vis-a-vis China. So how will they look at Taiwan as a part of that? Again, I hope that they'll continue to see the benefits of treating Taiwan as a country worthy of investment on its own merits, not just a subset of China issues, and that there are some real opportunities. I think the handling of COVID-19, I personally don't know why we're not doing everything Taiwan did. I mean, when you go over 200 days without a domestic transmission of the disease, that's something everyone should go to school on and learn from. I hope we can partner closer with Taiwan on that. But I think there are a number of other opportunities really on the table. I think the launching of this strategic economic dialogue is very important. I had a chance to travel to Taiwan with Undersecretary of State Keith Kroc when we represented the U.S. government at Lee Teng-hui's memorial service. But that was also the point in time when this dialogue was affirmed with his meeting with President Tsai and others. And I really hope that that is not only sustained, but that leads to a discussion about I don't know that we say free trade agreement anymore. That brand seems to be a bit tarnished by both parties in our system, but some sort of bilateral trade agreement that can strengthen our trade relationship and maybe mitigate against some of the economic coercion Taiwan faces. And I think our friends who put this report together included that in their set of recommendations as a key point, and I certainly would endorse that. I think the efforts on helping Taiwan successfully implement its ODC are critical. The Trump administration just had a slew of congressional notifications, I think 5 in the last 3 weeks. Much of these systems, like the Harpoons, the coastal missile defense systems, the UAVs, these are the key capabilities to see further and successful implementation of the ODC. But we can't stop there, given the threat that's continuing to emerge, the modernization efforts that continue to be underway. And so I hope the Biden administration will take a careful look at that and continue the practice of the routine arms sales, but targeted in support of the ODC in particular. I think there's more work we can do with partners in the region, and our friends mentioned some of these. I think it was Ambassador Young. Yes, we want Taiwan to keep its diplomatic allies. We want countries to stay on sides, which is sometimes an awkward position. It's the United States saying, do what we say, not as we did in 1979. But frankly, it's a different China and it's a different Taiwan than we had in 1979. So it's important to keep those diplomatic allies on sides. But I think even more important is the work, as Ambassador Young said, with Japan and Vietnam and India. These are key partners, and I think increasingly interested in working with Taiwan and supporting Taiwan. You know, Project 2049, we've been talking about Taiwan as a modern-day Asia Fulda Gap. If you remember your Cold War history, Fulda Gap was the place where it was thought most likely the U.S. and the Soviet Union might clash, given the proximity of our forces and the heavy armor and artillery. But it was also thought to be the most strategic area because the loss of Fulda Gap would greatly diminish our ability to protect the rest of Western Europe and NATO. If you look at the geography of Taiwan and its surrounding areas, I think you'll understand this analogy. The loss of Taiwan, how could we have confidence, and how could the Japanese have confidence in the defense of the Ryukyu Island chain and the East China Sea and their claims there? How could we have confidence that we could keep the free and open qualities preserved in the South China Sea, even out to the second island chain and into Oceania? How could we have confidence that with the loss of Taiwan, we'd be able to protect and secure our interests there? So I think, yes, America has great affinity for Taiwan. We have a shared history, but that is not the reason I believe the United States will ultimately want to be there for Taiwan. It's because it's in our strategic interest. And I think many countries in the Indo-Pacific are starting to understand that, and that will be motivation for us to strengthen cooperation with partners and allies in support of Taiwan in ways that I think are helpful. Again, I'm really glad to be part of this conversation. Again, congratulations on a fantastic report, and well done. And let's set about trying to see these policy recommendations implemented.
Superb. Thank you very much, Randy. And really, just let me highlight again the incredible work that you and our friends there at Project 2049 are doing in and really moving the ball forward and thinking, big picture issues with regards to Taiwan and Asia and China policy. For sure. And before I turn to our audience questions and answers, and we've already do have a few from our online viewers, I want to give an opportunity for Chip and Steve, if you want, to respond a bit to some of Randy's comments, if you'd like. If not, we can move to the questions and answers. It may be that we are all in complete agreement, and there may be no additional comments necessary. I think I've got the thumbs up from Steve and Chip. Did you want to say something? Great. And perhaps it wasn't, by precise design, but just by the virtue of all the years of government service that all of you on the panel have, it's great that we are able to underscore sort of the evolutionary qualities of Taiwan policy through the years of government service that that all of you have had, and that's reassuring, I think. And of course, in any transition, there's always a good deal of uncertainty, but here I think we've been able to highlight again by the work that Chip you've done, as Assistant Secretary, and Steve as years of decades in the Foreign Service, and Randy certainly in State and DoD have highlighted how a lot of the features and of U.S. Taiwan policy have been there and have have survived different transitions, and we can expect that I think these the qualities of this will continue to endure going forward. So with that, I'm going to turn to audience Q&A. And for those of you who have not already chimed in with your questions, again, you can do so by sending an email to contact@globaltaiwan.org, or by using the chat function on the YouTube page, or by tweeting us at Global Taiwan. So the first question I'm going to take here is from Tina Chung of Voice of America. Her question, addressed to no one in particular, so anyone can jump on this if you like, is China is reportedly planning on releasing a list of, quote, diehard Taiwan independence advocates, end quote. Will this action, the release of the blacklist to further pressure Taiwan in the next U.S. administration, have any impact on the new U.S. president's thinking and policy towards Taiwan? Because it sounds very much like what China has been doing to Hong Kong with the implementation of the national security law. And related to this question, does the panel expect China to ramp up more military pressure against Taiwan in order to test the new administration? If so, what will likely be the new president's response? Steve, on the Hong Kong point, maybe you want to jump in on that? An example of is China taking an example of Hong Kong and applying that to Taiwan now, and what are the U.S. response to that?
Well, it's a pretty poor example. If Deng Xiaoping has an afterlife, he might be rolling in his grave at the destruction of the one China, one country, two systems system that Xi Jinping has flushed down the toilet. As a longtime visitor and friend of Taiwan's, when things were going well with Hong Kong, I know my Taiwan friends would say, that has nothing to do with us. And then when things would go badly with Hong Kong, they'd say, see. I think that's in a capsule summarizes the attitude of Taiwan toward Hong Kong. It's sad. I love Hong Kong. I've been visiting there for 50 years. I wouldn't go there now because they'd probably try to arrest me. And I think I said Carrie Lam is a sad figure because I think she could have done better, but the pressure she's under is inordinate. And all it underscores is that Taiwan, with 90 somebody said 80, I want to say 90 miles of ocean water, plus its own defense and a very educated and engaged democratic population, has the tools to continue to defend its sovereignty despite China's threats. And I think, maybe I've said this already, if China unprovokedly threatens or attacks Taiwan and the United States does not get involved, we might as well just roll up and leave Asia. I think somebody else maybe said that as well. In addition to losing the island chain, we would probably lose Japan. It's just unthinkable to me that the United States would stand by in the event of aggression from the People's Republic.
That's a terrific question. Let me take a stab at this and maybe go to the macro level. The big challenge for the incoming administration is going to be developing some coherent policies. There's a damaging shorthand starting to circulate in certain publications about a new Cold War. There was only one Cold War. Russia had an autarkic economy. They didn't trade with anybody except at the point of a gun. So it was easy to form policies and strategies because we were dealing with a nation with no economic power to speak of. China's the other way around. There's a lot of countries that have vital economic relations with China and things like that. We need to concentrate on what we stand for and less on what we oppose and stand against. We need to recruit the willing cooperation of an informal alliance of democracies to face down challenges like this extraterritorial watch list or arrest on sight list for people who advocate for freedom and democracy and human rights and things like this. We need to start from a solid foundation on what we support, and then we can have a coherent high-level policy toward China, objecting where we must object, objecting where we will object because it violates our principles. Meanwhile, having a comprehensive policy that doesn't try and take the world's second largest economy and create a new Cold War out of it. The conditions don't apply, but we must stand up for our principles. China declares various things that they're really fond of as, quote, core interest, which is code words telling us we dare not question that. Well, by God, we got our own vital interests too, and it involves free speech, and democracy, human rights, and those things. And we need to do a much better and stronger job of standing up for those.
Let me just quickly build on what Steve and Chip said, and I think this goes towards one of our policy recommendations too as well. But beyond the sort of the speculation of this new blacklist, but I think it's also illustrative by other actions that China has taken in terms of its challenge to the liberal order, and I think again that's just what Chip had mentioned about the importance of really sort of affirming universal values are absolutely critical, and so therefore really cooperation between the United States and other like-minded countries, of course, including Taiwan, in a coalition or alliance of democracies in the region and beyond, I think must be energized, and this is one of our key policy recommendations. The idea was suggested in a recent speech given by Secretary of State Pompeo And I think it really could use more momentum, and as China continues to create a chilling effect on freedom of expression, not only, of course, within its own borders, but by its actions with regards to Hong Kong and threats against Taiwan and other countries as well. And so I think it's high time that we do sort of look at these actions not as isolated incidents, but as a very sort of holistic and whole of society challenge that presents to the free and open order. And okay, so the next question here I will take is from Garrett Vanderwees, who is one of our GTI's advisor, but also affiliated with George Mason University. His question is, if we want to have enough leverage vis-a-vis Goliath, Taiwan and the United States need to bring in friends and allies, such as Europe, Australia, Japan, India, and others. What can we do to work more closely together with our transatlantic friends and others, so together we can have enough leverage on Beijing to accept Taiwan as a friendly neighbor? Question. Well, I want to take that question. Steve? All right.
Well, I think, first of all, I have a lot of confidence in the Biden administration to pick good folks that know the issues and can focus on Asia as well as the broader world. I don't know if Kurt Campbell wants to leave his lucrative private practice, but it would be wonderful to see him come back. I understand that Lael Brainerd, Michelle Flournoy are a couple of other names that are being bounced around, and they are all solid experts on the substance and could bring the kind of smarts that we need to do the things that Russell has just suggested we need to do, and that Garrett as well, a good friend, has mentioned. And I think that lessening tensions with some of our non-allied dialogue partners like India, Vietnam, the ASEANs, Indonesia, could help us. Because, one thing I like to say is take a look at the map of China, and there's, I don't know, a dozen countries or so that share a border with them. None of them have good relations with China. And that's not an accident. China's a bully. China picks on the small and resents the strong. So there's a lot of potential in a Biden foreign policy that is a little bit less reactive and spiteful than the one we've seen under this guy, whose name I try not to mention. I have some nicknames for him that are not suitable for this thing, but I think Joe Biden is a very experienced politician and a guy who's got a lot of foreign policy smarts, and I'm sure that he's going to bring good new talent into government that will help him restore old alliances and friendships and build new ones, which is so necessary in the struggle that we have against China.
Go for it, Randy.
Yeah, just briefly, one of the interesting things about being a political appointee is you come in and you go away for a while and you come back, and some of the policies, it's like you never left, and it's like, has anybody been working on this since I was gone? But there are other things that changed pretty dramatically. And one of the things that I felt in this recent term of service is how far along the US and the EU have come in terms of convergence of views on the strategic landscape, the challenges from China, and even issues related to Taiwan. I mean, in the Bush administration, Steve Young and I were trying to prevent the EU from lifting the arms embargo against China. If you recall, Chirac and Schrader were seriously considering lifting the arms embargo. But this recent term of service, I think the EU partners well understand the kinds of challenges that China present. Now, when it comes to coordinated collective action, I think it depends on the issue. You know, the security issues, there aren't as many countries that can contribute on the hard power side and the security assistance side, but there are some. The French have been making transits through the Taiwan Straits, which obviously didn't go unnoticed to the Chinese. The French did a transit on their way to a fleet review in China, and they got kicked out of the fleet review for doing so. But I think on issues, for example, our tech competition with China and the integrity of our critical supply chains, I think there's a lot of interest in the EU in working with the US and Taiwan to ensure that environment is, we've got greater confidence and greater fidelity in our processes for protecting the innovation base and so on and so forth. So I'll stop there.
Chip.
Very quickly, to pile on to Randy's comment about the tech competition, civilian technological developments are becoming more and more applicable to the hard power side. It's not the old your father's industries anymore, where we had defense industries separate from civilian industries. Therefore, there's an opportunity here to make common cause with our friends in the EU and our democratic allies and friends in Asia, most specifically, including Taiwan, to work on cooperative tech development. We'd have to change some of our immigration rules to welcome the qualified high-tech folks to schools and research institutes in this country. But there's a way to start putting this together to get at what Garrett was saying about, or asking about, how do we create more of a productive effort? And I would also note in passing that Garrett has lost none of his capabilities of asking probing, penetrating questions.
Steve, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, one of the distinct privileges I had as the deputy director and then director of AIT was to meet some incredible techies, like Terry Gao of, I guess he calls himself Foxconn now, and Morris Zhang of TSMC, Stan Scher. And I see some of them are looking at opening up fab productions in the United States or Canada. And I think that that's a promising new area for the dramatically changing and developing high-tech industry to take advantage of American know-how and science in a partnership that would sort of push China a little bit farther out of the center of things. So I think that since we're talking about Taiwan as well as the United States, there's a lot of opportunities here that could strengthen the security of the high-tech industry and benefit American business.
I would just add here that I think in the area of governance, there is a whole lot more that Taiwan and European friends and allies, of course, to include Australia, Japan, India, and others in the Indo-Pacific region. But there's already a forum for such a discussion taking place with the Indo-Pacific Governance Forum that was launched last year, I believe, between the United States and Taiwan. But I think Europe now is starting to grapple with its own concerns with regards to China's sharp power and influence operations. And as their society grapples with these challenges, I think there are, and in addition to effects of corrosive capital throughout Eastern Europe and Western Europe as well, I think there's a lot that I think Taiwan's experiences in dealing with such influence operations could really be applied, and I think there's a great deal of information sharing that Taiwan and European friends can really learn from one another. So with that, let me turn to the last question here. This is from Stephen Smith, unaffiliated. Realistically, to what extent do the panelists believe a U.S.-Taiwan bilateral trade agreement could counter or offset the impact of exclusion from the recently established China-backed Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership agreement? Does Steve or Chip, you want to address this question? If not, I can kick us off and okay, Chip, go for it. Oh, both of them. Oh, great, sounds good.
Well, these grenades first, so I felt I owed him one here. The original Trans-Pacific Partnership had difficulties getting passed in the Obama administration. We had candidates from each party that was running in the 2016 election pretty much pedaling away from the free trade agreement as fast as they could. Nevertheless, there are opportunities out there. Japan took the leadership of what remains of the TPP. The RCEP's another thing. What we can do. I'm not the economic expert to balance the dollars and cents on what a specific bilateral trade agreement with Taiwan can do, but I know Japan is pretty heavy into foreign investment in Asia and Southeast Asia in particular. There's an opportunity here to put some things together. Some bilateral agreement between the U.S. and Taiwan is absolutely essential. The new administration, I think, is going to have an opportunity to stitch together some other arrangements, whether they're formalized with a name or not. I don't know, but I don't think it matters. What matters is we get the fact of free trade in there, coupled with some cooperative efforts on tech development.
Steve?
Yeah. As deputy director and director of AIT, I learned more about ractopamine, a food additive that people in Taiwan had silly objections to, which boiled down to the protectionism of a very small pork industry. But I think a free trade agreement now looks a lot more likely than it ever did in my time working on Taiwan, and would be a plus. It would benefit us a lot. It would make it easier for Taiwan investment and trade into our country. And it would also finally deal with that very small but powerful pork industry in the United States that somehow was afraid of competition from Taiwan. So I think there's a lot of prospects, and I think a Biden administration will take a look at them and bring a new sense of constructive cooperation to our relationship economically and in the trade field.
I'll exercise the prerogative and jump in here also as well. And I think to answer the question, as my two co-authors have done so brilliantly, I would only add that, I think there is a strategic logic to trade, one that had, I think been, minimized in the considerations to, take the United States out from the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And to what extent, as we argue and propose in our policy recommendation, which is, I think, where this question comes from, is that at the very least, a U.S.-Taiwan BTA would help to go and offset some of the pressure that from Beijing, and to be able to increase created by China's incessant efforts to integrate Taiwan economically in the hopes of further political integration. I think this was clearly reflected in its actions in promoting several rafts of preferential measures to attract, Taiwanese businesses as well as people to set up shop in China. But I think what Taiwan needs beyond just a U.S.-Taiwan BTA, however, is also multilateral initiatives, and that's I think where it's where I think there will be more difficulties presented by the recent inking of the RCEP, which excludes Taiwan because of China. But hopefully, what a potential U.S.-Taiwan BTA could initiate, at the very least, in the beginning, is that it would encourage other countries to also explore their respective BTAs with Taiwan, and I think that's why that is also very important for the United States, to really consider how to move forward with a U.S.-Taiwan BTA. Now, we've exhausted the time that we've allocated to today's discussion. And I want to thank, again, my co-authors, Chip Gregson and Steve Young, for participating in this study and also for the rollout of today's event. I apologize that we were unable to get to all the other questions that we have, but we're more than happy to take those questions offline. And you can send your questions again to contact@globaltaiwan.org. And again, thanks to the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office for their support. I would be remiss, of course, if I conclude today's event without thanking, of course, GTI supporters, our co-founders, our board of directors, and also our advisors, like Chip and Steve, for really making our programs as substantive as they are. So thank you all, and thank you for joining us. And this session will be available online. So again, visit our website, www.globaltaiwan.org. Thank you all. Take care.